Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, bringing you a brand new review, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon, which is now streaming worldwide on Netflix, and of course is a 6-episode series about Vince McMahon, the former head of WWE, which still sounds weird to call him former, but we're going to be talking a little bit about that. But as always, heading into this review, this is a series I've been very much looking forward to seeing. Obviously, I've always been a fan of wrestling since I was younger. I've dipped in and out over the years, and his removal and the news stories of the last few years is kind of what's drawn me back to it in a really weird way. So I'm going to delve into that a little bit, but I want to hear from people at home that may have seen this, that are watching it later. Comment your thoughts on this documentary. Was there things you weren't aware of? Anything that really caught you off guard? The new allegations? Was it too tame? Did it go into too much? Things you didn't like, because I'm very curious to see how this goes down inside and outside of the wrestling communities, and I think that's going to be everyone's separate approach to that. And kind of how I mean of that is very popular Netflix documentary, Drive to Survive. We've reviewed it on the channel for years. It's quite comfortably one of the worst things that's happened to F1 in recent memory, from my opinion. And that's someone that's watched it for 15 years. But it brought a lot of new faces. But a lot of people that didn't watch F1 found it through the documentary and have a tainted vision of what F1 is and should be, and all the nonsense they do in that series. So I'm always sceptical when you're getting documentaries such as this. I almost called it sports. It's not, of course, it's sports entertainment, professional wrestling, whatever you want to call it. Professional wrestling is the correct term. And it is something where everyone's going to respond differently, again, to your prior knowledge. But straight away, differently to Drive to Survive and other Netflix things I've seen, this isn't sat here trying to put the image, put everything in a good way. Look how great this is, let's fictionalize this, let's change this, let's edit this in a different way. This really is telling the story of Vince McMahon, ironically to a degree from his own persona, him doing a sit-down interview, behind the scenes, talking about his early life, being involved within wrestling, to purchasing the company from his dad, all the way up to him leaving last year, and a little bit that's following after with current events. So it genuinely details his involvement within the history, and straight away I can say I do believe the narrative of this is the right one. It's really tricky with documentaries because you will get some biased filmmakers, you'll get unbiased filmmakers. I think what this does really well from the get-go is stay in the in-between with Vince. It does look at the great stuff he did for the industry. It looked at how he built it up, how he commercialized it, the names he brought through, and then as well as that, it is looking at the other things, the not so pretty side, sort of destroying the territories back in the day, heading into modern day, the accusations and everything else, and things that completely failed, like when he did XFL or the bodybuilding stuff. So it handles that quite well, and I think if they choose to focus on one or the other, the documentary can't work, but it actually did a good job of balancing that. So that's quite a big thing for me heading into watching this. As I said, it's always tricky with documentaries, and some wrestling fans might find some of this very paint by the numbers. Yeah, we know about the allegations, or yes, we lived through this, we remember the Attitude Era, we remember the screw job, we remember the Attitude, not Attitude, sorry, I was going to say Ruthless Aggression Era. There's going to be things that are very simple for some. But this is a Netflix series. This is going to be on their homepage. This is going to be bringing in people that don't watch wrestling, that don't know who Vince McMahon is. And this is where this documentary has excelled. They've been able to, in 6 hours, paint that image, and I think go into the core mechanics of what's made him as a person, as a promoter, what wrestling has done as an industry, looking at the drug side of things, looking at the not the travelling side, but looking at how wrestling has evolved over the decades as well, heading into modern day of 2024, even with the likes of AEW being mentioned toward the end. It's a really interesting observation, and that's kind of where I stand with that. And if I get more into the review side of things, a big part of this documentary comes down to the talent that are being interviewed. And it does make it crystal clear in every episode that most of the people in this were interviewed prior to the allegations coming out, which I think is important to address, because you might have a lot of concerned former wrestlers that might have done an interview 3 years ago, 2 years ago, before anything. They don't want what they said being tainted. And it does clarify the years many of the people were interviewed, some of which they interview again after the allegations come out. Bruce Pritchard is the obvious one if you've seen it. He calls the documentary garbage, says it's been very one-sided, it doesn't reveal the real Vince McMahon. And in a beautiful piece of editing, it then says a few days later, here's another load of Vince McMahon allegations. And at that point, we stick with the journalist. So I think it's handled that very well. And with respect to me, what I thought of that, that's exactly what I wanted it to be. It isn't looking into shock factor by going through allegations. It's a current legal thing. It speaks about that. But alongside that, it isn't hiding away from telling what it needs to tell. As the years go by, one criticism is this might look too soon. Some people think maybe they should have paused it until after the court stuff, but I don't think that's what the goal of this documentary is. I think this is a documentary that just continued to evolve because of the real life side of things when this was in production. You look at how little Vince has been interviewed outside of WWE in a non-WWE environment. This mentions the famous Playboy article quite a few times, but then having him talking about certain things of his life, his relationship with his dad or lack of a relationship with his dad, it does a really good job at exploring that through him, through his family members. I think the 6-episode structure works well for this, around about 45-50 minutes per episode. And alongside that, you're then able to bring in the different wrestlers for the different times. Of course, unfortunately, we have to put up with Hulk Hogan for a good chunk of it, but he sort of disappears as it goes on, just like how obviously the wrestling industry went. But the standout for me was Bret Hart in this documentary. Again, if you're unfamiliar with the screw job, it goes into that quite a chunk. It also talks about what happened with Owen Hart, but it does the political side of things really well with WCW, with WWE, what was going on with the Monday Night Wars. So I liked that it did that, and it isn't as predictable as it has been in other documentaries. When you look at the in-house WWE documentaries, everything's painted in this lovely little portrait that everything came through for Vince, but it does make those conversations of, hey, well, Ted Turner was taking his best talent in the 90s and he didn't like it, but he was doing this in the 70s toward the territories, so why is he so aggrieved? And they actually ask him things like that, and I think that's where the documentary really does excel, when they're able to catch him out live on the interviews, to put those clips into the series, to get it live on air. We've seen Vince McMahon's reaction in real life. He has criticised this. There are reports that he wanted to buy it so it can never be released. When you hear that sensationalism, you'd think, wow, this is going to really destroy his legacy. I don't think it does. I think what's going to destroy it's the real life stuff that's happening now, but maybe you're expecting this to be some tell-all of here's 20, 30 new stories about him. Maybe you'll learn a couple of new ones. I didn't know about the Shane McMahon knife scenario. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave it there, but one of the most unhinged moments in the documentary is Paul Heyman recounting a story about Shane McMahon and Vince, and maybe what led to Shane leaving back in 2009. So it's a really interesting perspective of who they're interviewing, why they're interviewing them, and what they're talking about. And I think where that works within the documentary is it makes for good TV. And it's always tricky reviewing documentaries because so much of it can be fictionalized, so much of it can be fake, editing choices here and there. No doubt there are dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of interviews with so many people, but we've come out with the 6 hours, and I think it's a good 6 hours. I think I recommend this series for people. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a fan of wrestling, this is probably something you're going to see regardless, and I think you're going to be more intrigued by the actual interviews with Vince and some of the people involved talking about their stories. You might be bored by the stuff we know, as I mentioned, the screw job, the Attitude Era, all that sorts of thing, you know, hearing the story of the Click and the Curtain Call for the millionth time. But if you haven't watched wrestling, if you're not into that and you're curious about this Vince McMahon guy, all of that's going to be mind-blowing. So I think this really excels for the general audience, and that's kind of what these Netflix documentaries do. As I said, it isn't as full-on as it could be, but it does respect the current court cases while dedicating a good 40 minutes of the final episode on that. I think that's integral. If they didn't acknowledge that, they didn't go through that, the documentary fails, and it does leave it open-ended for obviously the authorities to do what needs to be done. And that's going to kind of round out this review. It's always weird reviewing documentaries. I've not done a review for ages. I've been quite ill. I don't know if my voice is okay. But there'll be a lot more videos on the channel. We've got Joker Part 2 coming out next week. We've got Megalopolis this week. We've got the Mount Rushmore series. There's a lot of things happening, so there are more videos planning. If you want to find out about other videos, go get us on our social medias. Linktree.com/CinemaSavvy. That'll pop you through to our Facebook, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram. We're a lot more active with our reels now as well. So if you want to find us, follow us, you can support the channel by doing that. But that is going to round it out for today. Thank you all for watching, and be sure to join us on the next one. Take care.